Hello and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. In today's talk, I was going to cover Vedic astrology or Jyotish as it relates to the Vedas. So we're going to get into a bit of history. So if we're going to look a little bit into the history of Jyotish or Vedic astrology, the thing to note first is that the origins of it are not clear. And that's partly because the way that Jyotish began is it's understood or believed to be is that Jyotish was revealed by great sages or seers, also known as rishis. So when I mean revealed, we would generally call that like cognization of the information related to Jyotish. So cognize meaning they didn't figure it out, they didn't calculate it, they didn't observe it, but they would sit and meditate and they would intuit information about the stars and how they moved and the planets, how they moved and what it meant for us, the human race, I guess. And the thing is that, again, before the Vedas is really one of the first written historical documents in Indian culture. But Jyotish was around before that. And so it's believed that it was transmitted orally from the guru or teacher. But the Vedas was actually the first written account of Jyotish. And again, the Vedas are considered sacred books of the Aryan people. Um, so, and the thing is that in that time, I mean, unlike today, or very much in contrast to today, the sacred passing down through a lineage of people, the sort of sacred flow, a river of knowledge from one human to the next, one mind to the next. That was all very special and highly prized. Maybe prize is the wrong word. Highly appreciated. Was really considered a sacred tradition and passage really. Um, and so it's thought that maybe the reason why, and again, it's unclear, but it's thought that maybe the reason why Jyotish was actually recorded as part of the Vedas, and the Vedas was written at all, was because there was, sometimes the rivers flow strong, and there's a lot of water, there's a lot of, energy and life running through a river, and sometimes it tends to run dry. And so, also through the course of human history, there were times when the river, the knowledge river of Jyotish, would run dry because there just weren't sort of adequate or enough disciples who knew the information and could pass it down for various reasons. And so, it's thought that one of the reasons why it might have been written down is to spare it, save it, during those times of the sort of knowledge drought or transmission. Um, so again, back in the day, and even not so far back. I mean, the Vedas was more than 5,000 years old, but not even too long ago, or in some traditions of Jyotish today, there is prodigious memorization of Shastra or classical tradition that's at use. So that's part of learning Jyotish is just memorizing um, what would they call them? Not just a text, but it's different than text. It's like hymns. It's like a mala. It's like these beads. Um, they're very tightly created few lines that are just so packed with information and understanding that if you're able to memorize these beads and string them along on a necklace, then you wear that necklace of knowledge, and you're able to draw deeper realizations from it. So that's what's thought to happen, and some people actually know that's what happens. Clearly not me, although I have deep respect for it. That's just unfortunately I haven't had that the opportunity to learn that way. But so the Vedas are four books of hymns, and again, hymns. When we talk about hymns, we're talking about essentially music of some kind or poetry, right? And so, especially if we're memorizing pages and pages of these beads, these words that are going to transmit all this deep knowledge. um, things like music and rhythm and poetry are going to help with the memorization process. Um, and so, again, that also brings up this idea that the Vedas in some ways are perhaps not completely adequate to transmit the oral transmission of um, Jyotish specifically, because again, we're attempting a visual transmission of something that was auditory. And so I guess in my mind, it's sort of like, if we're looking at Beethoven, we're trying to get at like what was in Beethoven's mind or Mozart's mind as a musician. And all we have is their music, like the written form of the music. Can we ever really know what they truly intended through that? And so that's why there's different interpretations of Mozart and Beethoven and stuff like that. So that's also perhaps why there's different interpretations of the different aspects of the Vedas, including Jyotish. So again, the Vedas was the first written account of Jyotish. Now, the thing already you're probably picking up that the Vedas, 4 books, and again, I don't know how big they are. I'm assuming they're expansive, but I don't really know. To really get at the deeper meaning, understanding of the Vedas and what they were truly conveying, because it wasn't just about, in today's world, we think if we just memorize a bunch of stuff, um, we confuse knowledge with wisdom. Yeah, we confuse information with true comprehension, or deeper insights. And so the knowledge can be passed on, but the deeper insights may not always be. And so to truly understand the deeper insights and wisdom of the Vedas, you had to have this high level of intuition that the rishis, the sages did have. Some of them had. Um, and the thing is to even get at attempting to understand the Vedas in its depth, true depth, they developed what are called the Vedanga, and the Vedanga are the limbs of the Vedas, and there's 6 of them. So you would need to study the 6 limbs of the Vedanga before even trying to understand the Vedas. Each limb is considered to be a living being. And so sometimes you'll hear in my talks about Jyotish, like sometimes, like I think I just did, I just did a talk on symbolism of Venus, and I mentioned in there part of the reason why I use photographs in my talk is that as you're looking at the photographs, it will potentially help you develop more than just knowledge, but like start developing your intuition about, how does Venus, Venusian energy present or manifest in our day-to-day lives. And by doing that, you actually develop a deeper relationship with the planet. I think I said that. And part of that is that these things, quote unquote things, are not actually things. They're living beings. They have a living, breathing, palpating life to them. And so when we spend time learning these things, it's just like spending time with a person. Typically, when you spend time with a person, even if it doesn't seem like, I don't know, it doesn't have to be big events or something like that, but even day to day, just knowing what somebody eats for breakfast or do they eat breakfast at all, like you start to develop a deeper intimacy and understanding of that person, their rhythms, their motivations, and things like that. And so the same is true for these things, the Vedas, the Vedanga, and Jyotish. So just try to understand that that's part of the reason, also part of the reason why the tradition is what it is. So, again, each limb is a living being, and it's also known as a vidya. Vidya specifically means right knowledge in Sanskrit, but vidya is considered to be a goddess to be worshipped, an energy of being an entity to be worshipped. And so the Jyotirvidya is the Vidya sort of entity. I don't know, I think of it as like the spirit of Jyotish, like it's a living entity, something higher than myself, that has the kind of deep wisdom, direction, is sort of the guardian of this tradition. And so when the Jyotirvidya grabs one of us, it possesses one of us, and we develop a deeper relationship with the Jyotirvidya, then that's what starts to unfold the learning, the study of Jyotish for us. So some people will, be interested in Jyotish and they might, read a couple things or listen to a couple talks or whatever. But if it truly grabs you, like it's grabbed me, I believe, then you will go deeper and deeper into the study, because you're developing a relationship, and as you develop the relationship, um, the Vidya, I believe, test you or test me. Um, and if you pass those tests, then more of it is revealed. It's about developing trust. Yeah. So, yeah, we start to, if we are possessed by the Jyotirvidya, then we will learn the study of light, and the light being the sun, the light of the sun and planets and stars. So also know back then, so many years ago, that astrology was essentially based on observations with the naked eye. There was no technology, fancy lenses and telescopes and things like that. If you consider that fancy nowadays, back then it would have been fancy. And perhaps some Vedic calculations, but again, it's unclear. And just to give an example of what somebody might see, what they saw back then in the night sky, and how they interpreted it, is the example is given of the myth of Venus, or Shukra in Sanskrit. So Venus is considered to be a planet that symbolizes the ability to bring the dead back to life, and that's a pretty hefty, um, role to play in the world, in the universe. Venus has a 584-day cycle, as it, in terms of it going fully around. And it's also like both the morning star and the evening star. So meaning that it's a very bright star that pops up right as the sun sets. Um, that's evening star. Or it's like the last star that's seen very bright in the sky before the sun pops up, and that's the morning star. And Venus is both. Now, the thing is, Venus, the reason why sometimes it's morning star and sometimes it's evening star is that Venus is always close to the sun. And so it looks like, based on what you just see with your eyes, that Venus kind of zigzags back and forth, like, by the sun. When it gets very close to the sun, it gets eclipsed by the sun and Venus becomes invisible. So the thing is, Venus becomes invisible for a few weeks, excuse me. And then when it pops up on the other side, it becomes evening star if it was a morning star, or the other way around. If it was evening star, it then pops up as morning star when it passes the sun. And we call this, when it becomes invisible by the sun, we call that combust or asta in Sanskrit. And so, in that way, Venus had the ability to kind of resurrect itself, rebirth itself. And the other thing that was noted is that a typical human pregnancy is about 265 days, which is about half the length of the Venus cycle. And so each pass of Venus has the ability to bring about new life. So, okay. So just as one example of, again, how the observation gets translated into interpretation and myth and stuff like that, and how the myth also helps us to remember what the planets do and what they symbolize. But in terms of the specific 6 limbs of the Vedas, there's the Vyakarana, which is grammar. So the grammar, Sanskrit grammar, I believe it is a Sanskrit grammar in the Vedas. And each of these Vedangas, limbs, are considered to be kind of an aspect of a person. If the Vedanga itself, the list of these 6 limbs, was a person, each of these limbs represents a different function of that human. So for anthropomorphizing this, yeah. So the first one, Vyakarana, the grammar. So that basic structure of the language is the face. 2 is the chandas, which is the meter. So the sort of rhythm, um, is the legs, so how it walks, how the language walks. The shiksha, which is the intonation, which is how we breathe and change the sounds via our breath. and mouth and the shape of our mouth. That's written on the lips. Then there's Nirukta, which is etymology, and those are the ears of the Vedanga. There's Kalpa, which is ritual. So these are the things we actually do, the rituals that we actually do to put ourselves in alignment with the higher energies of the Vedas. And then there's Jyotish. So Jyotish is a Vedanga to help us develop more insights about the Vedas. So it's a root to that. And so Jyotish is the astronomy or astrology of that day. And Jyotish is considered the eyes because you can actually see, again, as the planets and stars and luminaries move and that sort of thing, you can actually see how um, energies are shifting and how that and the implications thereof. Okay, so again, very brief, but probably fairly condensed and pithy, much like the hymns of the Vedas and traditional Shastra. But just to have some context, historical context also for Jyotish and where it derives from, how it derives, as much as we can know the details of it, but at least we can know the sort of outgrowth of this, the flow of this tradition through time. So that is it today. A bit short, but I think again pretty condensed in terms of the potential origins of Jyotish and their relation and its relationship with the Vedas and the Vedanga. So as always, I hope you found this talk interesting, helpful, useful as you navigate the energy cycles of your life. Um, uh, More of my teaching videos on astrology, Jyotish, Vedic astrology can be found in the concepts playlist. So if you're looking for more content like this, I would look there. But otherwise, thank you for your time and your interest. And until next one, take care. Namaste.